welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm Jordan Hill. With me, as always, is Kip Adams. Kip, we are right before the 4th of July. Kind of a little bit of a quiet week, although that could pretty much change at any moment. How is this week treating you?
Well, it's a lot cooler this week, so I appreciate Mother Nature throwing some rain down on us. It was much appreciated. The AC got to take a small break, and end of the month, Braves are playing great. We got DeJounte Murray from the Spurs, big week for the Hawks as well. So I'm pretty excited. I'm pumped for July. I know, obviously, with recruiting, it's a little bit of a downtick as far as visits for the most part, because we got kind of a dead period coming up until that last week in July. But I don't think it's going to be a month for recruiting overall. So I think I'm just ready to close out June strong, and hopefully the Braves can do that as well and beat those Phillies again. It feels pretty good being 3 games back. If you would have said that a month or so ago, most people would have kind of laughed at you, thought we were just going to be a wild card team, and now it feels like we got a chance. So overall, everything seems to be going well in all aspects. It's an exciting time for Atlanta sports fans, and I think for Georgia sports fans in general. It's just the high has not come down from multiple championships being brought to the state.
Yeah, you brought that up. I wanted to mention this because I threw it on the board. A really cool day on Wednesday at the College Football Hall of Fame. NASCAR driver, Georgia native Chase Elliott was there. They had his championship trophy from 2020. They had the World Series trophy, and they had the College Football Playoff trophy. Kip, I gotta admit, I was jealous. I was like, man, I wish there was they had given us a little heads up. I'd have been down there hanging out with Chase and taking some photos of these trophies.
Yeah, that was a big trophy. It was I can't say it ever has seen, I guess, the NASCAR Cup trophy, but significantly in size, I guess, very impressive. And just seeing all of them there, you would have thought they would have promoted that before now. Maybe it did. We missed the press release, but just having all those there, it seems like a big deal. I know I get the emails all the time telling me, where to see the Braves World Series trophy. It's in a different spot all the time. I think it's in Austell tomorrow, and it's everywhere, every week. So if you're going to have them all in one place, and it's a place that people typically enjoy going to in the College Football Hall of Fame, I think it's a cool deal down there in Atlanta. Promote that. It's a big deal, and you have Chase Elliott there. So unless it's closed off to the public with him being there, I would think that would be kind of a big deal.
No doubt about it. Well, we're going to go ahead and get into today's episode. Rusty Mansell is out. I know he was at a padded camp up there in Rome, so he's obviously keeping the roads hot, keeping you all informed on what's going on and the upcoming players to keep your eyes on. So Kip and I are going to do another mailbag episode of the podcast. We went through, appreciate all the people on the board who asked questions. Tell the people, too, who are watching, go into the comments, ask questions. We'll do our best to get a good mix of questions from the people watching, as well as our board members who decided to hit us up with some questions. We're going to start, since recruiting is such a big topic right now, we will start with Hooper G. Dawg, who asked, will UGA have the number 1 recruiting class at the end of August? And then there was a second part of that we can get to in a second. But let's start with that, Kip. When we get to that point in the year, what do you think this class is going to look like? Will it have a shot at being number 1 at the end of August?
Man, what a great question. I think, there are a lot of variables involved with just saying, will they be number 1? I mean, right now, Georgia's number 6, 11 verbal commitments right now on the board publicly for Georgia. But as we've said, we expect July to be a big one for Georgia in recruiting. And, they're going to add a lot of guys to the class. And we know of a couple guys who are going to announce their commitment. So it's probably a good chance, opportunity to kind of mention those guys. You got Jonel Aguero, the 5-star safety. I think Georgia has a good chance of adding him to the mix. He announces on July 23rd. You have Jamal Jarrett, the massive defensive tackle, gets a lot of comparisons to Jordan Davis, 6'5", 345 pounds. He announces July 19th. I like Georgia there as well. And then, you have the opportunity for some other guys to announce as well, including Daniel Harris. He's going to start off the month of July announcing his commitment, a 4-star cornerback out of Miami. He's going to announce Friday. So I like Georgia's chances there. So that's 3 guys right now to add to the group. I think they're going to add some other guys in the month of July. I mean, we don't have announcement dates for some guys, but when you start, adding some guys to the class calculator in 24/7 Sports, guys that maybe Georgia's in a good spot with, let's say, like a Kelton Smith, the offensive lineman out of Carver, Columbus, Sadir Mitchell, the defensive tackle up there in New Jersey. Those are guys that I think could announce their commitments in the month of July that Georgia's in good shape with. Right there, you're already talking about having 17 verbal commitments right there. If something like that were to happen in July, that puts Georgia, looking at the class calculator, at 265 and some change. Maybe there's a rankings update that, changes that a little bit, but that right there, that would move them ahead of Notre Dame, who's right now at 262 points. But at the same time, we're not expecting schools like Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas, to not land any commitments as well in the month of July. So mathematically speaking, will Georgia end July with the number 1 class? It's definitely possible. I think that, again, there are other guys that I haven't even mentioned that could announce their commitments to Georgia in July that, Georgia leads for right now, or have already told the coaching staff they plan to come. So it's very possible it happens, but at the same time, we don't know if other programs are going to land several commitments. I think regardless, you look at where Georgia stands right now, they're in really great shape overall in the class. And I just think going into the season, they're going to have a lot of recruiting momentum overall. And I think fans will be really excited about the group that's on board in that recruiting class.
No doubt. I mean, I think looking at it with the parameters of the question, will they have the number 1 at the end of August? It's really hard to say. I feel like a good projection is probably in the top 3. I think they have a very good shot at being in the top 3, which if you can bring in that kind of talent, I know it feels nice to get that number 1 class and what's considered the number 1 class in the nation. They'd be still honestly sitting pretty if they have a chance to be in that mix. Go to one of the questions that's in the chat. Are we in it for Robert Stafford? He's committing around 2 p.m. He's one of the finalists. I think from what I've seen, Miami seems like might be the favorite. So, might be one of those that Georgia may not wind up getting, but there's several other guys they're still in the mix for, and I think will be in good shape there. The second question that Hooper G. Dawg hit on and asked us with was, will the offense outshine the defense this season for Georgia? I don't think so. I know that the defense lost a whole lot of playmakers from last year. I still think this defense has a lot of talent. Looking at, you can even see too in the positional breakdowns and the rankings we've seen that Kip and I have written a bunch about. A lot of outlets see Georgia's position groups on defense still being among the best in the nation, specifically defensive backs. I know Phil Steele had them number 1. I think their linebackers are still in really good shape, particularly. I know they lost a lot of production inside linebacker, but some of those guys back I think are really, really interesting. And then you factor in Nolan Smith coming back. I think this offense is going to be good. And I think by me saying that, if you're a fan, that shouldn't make you worry about the offense. I just know what I've seen from Kirby Smart year after year, and the defense has always come through and made a lot of plays and done a very good job of reloading talent. And picking up essentially where the last guy left off. Kip, what do you think as far as offense versus defense? Do you have a feel for what you think may be the stronger part of the Georgia team in 2022?
I mean, I think it goes without saying that, asking this group on paper to defensively be more productive or better than last year's maybe generational defense, a defense that we might not see again just as far as the depth for a while. But if that comes down to being a top 3, top 5 defense, which I think is well within reason for expectations, Georgia's offense is continuing to get, last year's version. It gets, it's not talked about enough how just efficient and productive the offense was last year. Whether that's top 10, top 15 offense, if that improves to, number 8 offense in the country, there's still a chance that the defense is higher ranked at the end of the year than the offense. I just think we might be getting closer to the balance and the two just being equally productive, but we're still talking about both sides of the ball are probably going to be considered among the 10 best in the country. So I just think it's more just kind of, returning to the mean as far as the offense and defense are concerned. And that's really just what you should see at Georgia when they're just recruiting at a high level. They have so much talent on both sides of the ball that, they have the capability of being among the best in the country. That was the goal for Kirby Smart when he came to Georgia, was just to maximize this roster, increase the talent across the board, and he's done that. So maybe the offense outshines the defense. I think people usually gravitate toward the offense. So if Georgia's putting up 42 points a game this season and allowing, 14, 15 points a game, then you can pick which side of the ball you think is shining more. But I think that it's a situation where both could shine equally this year. And I think that bodes pretty well for Georgia.
No doubt about it. Go to another question. This was a really interesting one from Philly Blood. If the NCAA limit for on-field coaches is lifted, what positions do you believe will be added? I imagine Buster Faulkner as QB coach and potentially Scott Cochran back on the field. Any others you would expect? Kip, you can chime in here as well. I mean, I think those are the two big ones, the most obvious ones, Buster Faulkner and Scott Cochran. Buster has gotten a lot of credit for the work he's done with Georgia's quarterbacks and also in trying to really sell the future of the quarterback position at Georgia. We heard about Buster a good bit when it came to Arch Manning. The only other person besides those two guys that strikes me as would make sense would be Mike Bobo. Just given his experience, given his wealth of knowledge, he would be the other guy if they, were really looking at adding on to, and really taking advantage if the NCAA gets rid of that rule that limits how many on-field coaches you can have. Kip, anyone else come to mind or any thoughts on those three potentially being added to the on-field staff when it's all said and done?
If you're allowed to have as many on-field coaches as you want, then they're just going to specialize it even more. We would have a kickers coach out there. You're going to also just have specialized recruiting positions. You're going to have a coach out there to recruit every single position. And I mean, if you're talking Georgia, you just start looking at like wide receiver. You have an outside wide receivers coach. You have, you bring in, I'll just, say it, you bring in a guy like Hines Ward to coach the slot receivers at Georgia. Kirby would always be thinking about recruiting, but just overall, how can I improve my coaching staff? And if you're lifting a limit on how many coaches he can put on the field, then he's going to bring in every single coach possible, a pass rush coach, cornerbacks coach. It's just, if you're able to add more guys, and he's going to add more guys. So I think it's a situation where you want to know what the recruiting calendar is. For one, I think that's another thing that they're going to probably streamline. It's just when coaches can go out and recruit, how many can go out and recruit. If you're lifting the limit on how many coaches can go out and recruit, how much structure is there going to be there to give these coaches a chance to have a breather? Because that's kind of where we're at right now, is where they're recruiting nonstop. And if they're not recruiting, I mean, they have practice, they have fall camp. That the one time you have a dead period, it's time to start preparing for the season. So I think that's something that they have to look at and say, hey, if we don't force them to take a break, they're not going to take a break, because it's just too competitive out there. And especially in recruiting, they're going to try having people on campus, as often as they can, or they're going to send coaches out as often as they can. So that's kind of where things are. I would not expect this to happen, this fall. I don't think they're anywhere close to that. I just think it's a situation where they're starting to get a little bit of a conversation involved about what they'd like to do there. I think it's more something that they'll be looking for next year. And I'm really interested to see what they do.
It's going to be really intriguing, not only for Georgia, but, for all these teams that we know have built humongous support staffs. You got to imagine some of those guys would be coming on field. And then again, like you said, Kip, I mean, bringing in specialty coaches for certain positions. I mean, it'd be really, really fascinating just to see how that plays out. I want to bring up one more question before we take a break. And I thought this was a really interesting one from Big Dog Status 99. He said, why, despite Georgia having excellent coaches for DB since Kirby has been here, has Georgia seemingly experienced depth issues in the secondary? Transfers, injuries, missing on evals or targets was part of the question. I think a big part of it is just the transfer portal. I think that the fact that so many of these guys want to see the field, I made a list of the guys who left just in this past year: Latavius Brini, Jalen Kimber, Amir Speed, Lavassier Carroll. Those are all guys that, they had different amounts of playing time and basically different outlooks on what roles they would play. But those were guys that decided they were going to go elsewhere. And, some of these guys, I think, have big opportunities at their new schools. I think that's what it boils down to. And it was something that Kirby talked about on March 22nd. He was talking about the depth issues that Georgia had, and he pointed to receiver and he pointed to defensive back, having really being really thin in both positions as far as the depth chart goes. And Kirby said those guys are a little higher maintenance in terms of thinking of themselves. They expect to play right away and go. It's certainly a position of concern for us in terms of recruiting and development as a skill position. To me, that's what it sort of boils down to, not so much on maybe missing on some of the recruits they did sign or anything like that. I think they just see, in some of those DBs they've had, talented guys that were kind of, waiting in the wings. And you get a situation with the portal. It obviously works both ways. But those guys decided they want to go elsewhere and try their luck, like Amir Speed going to Michigan State, Jalen Kimber going to Florida. Those guys see opportunities elsewhere. So that's sort of what it boils down to me. And that's what makes some of those positions really crucial for this 2023 class. We've seen Georgia really pursuing some, top of the line recruits in that secondary. They've done a good job so far adding to those positions, and we'll see how it goes. Even this week with a guy like Daniel Harris, a cornerback that's going to be announcing, if Georgia can continue to add valuable pieces in the secondary.
Yeah, and then if you just look at last year and, the guys that were playing for other programs, you think a guy like Tyreek Stevenson would not have played significant snaps for Georgia. He would have started. He was in line to start, and goes to Miami and, starts there. And then you look at also Major Burns, started at LSU. I think he got hurt, but started there. That's two guys that probably play significant minutes for Georgia last year. And then the fact that, they thought they had an All-American that was coming on board to help, and Tyke Smith, and he tears his ACL. He has the injury early on the season, then tears his ACL in the Auburn game. That's three guys right there. One, obviously, who was on the roster to start the season, and they had to look elsewhere. So if you're looking at why there might be some, depth issues in the secondary, it's three guys who left the roster at some point last year who probably would have started for Georgia last year on that elite defense that they had. So it just, one, it kind of shows you where those depth issues may have come from, and also it just points back to just how good the defense still was without all those guys and without Jermaine Johnson being at Florida State. It's very impressive what they were able to do. But at the same time, the depth issues at Georgia are not the same as depth issues at other places. That's why you could still play at a high level, because you still have guys that are talented there. They just aren't up to where Kirby Smart wants them to be right now. And he's asking a lot for his guys in defense. But when those guys are ready to step in and earn that playing time, they usually play at a really high level. So it's just the expectations from Kirby Smart are really high. And some of these young guys that are on the roster right now, I mean, he's going to push them in fall camp. And they talk about how practice is, the hardest part of Georgia's season last year. I mean, it kind of that tells you why he's trying to prepare them so that the games are actually easier than the practice. So I just think some of these young guys, once they get acclimated to that, I think Georgia's depth at safety will start to, even out a little bit. And some of these young talented guys will be able to step into the much bigger roles, just like we saw from Lewis Seen.
Yeah, I thought it was very important, Kip, that you brought up Tyke Smith. He's one of my big question marks coming in. He played really, really well at West Virginia and really just couldn't stay healthy last year, banged up at the start of the year and then had that torn ACL. He's a guy to watch, and he's a guy that I think, for the sake of Georgia's secondary, is going to be really important. I want to see how he factors in if he's able to win that safety spot opposite of Chris Smith. So we're going to take a quick break, but we got more questions coming up. A lot of numbers-based questions, a lot of over-unders we're going to tackle. We'll see if we can handle that and see what we got on there. So we'll take a quick break and then be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Well, yeah, there were a couple of questions on here that were very similar between Kirby Smart 1 and Memphis Dawg. And reading Memphis Dawg's question, ahead of fall camp, where opinions are bound to change, who would be players you project to lead the team in sacks, tackles for a loss, if it's different than sacks, interceptions, and then I'll go and take Kirby Smart 1. Ask basically the same thing, except also ask about rushing touchdowns. I kind of, look through and try to really think about my options for these. Rushing touchdowns, I think I'm going to give it to Kenny McIntosh. I think he's going to be the guy that's kind of the lead guy. Really, it seems like it'll be between him and Kendall Milton. But I think I would give Kenny the edge there. Sacks, I kind of went back and forth on because to me, the two options that really look good are Nolan Smith and Jamon Dumas-Johnson. At the end, I kind of went for the inexperienced guy. I went with Jamon. I think that just hearing as much as we have about what he was able to do in spring, even hearing some of his teammates talk about how he played last year, in limited roles, getting in that UAB game, and I think he had a sack, and I think he had a pick six. I mean, I think this guy has a chance to pick up where these inside linebackers left off. I made sure and included Nolan. I thought that he's going to have a big season. I gave him the edge on tackles for loss. And then interceptions, again, that one I had a couple of different options that I think are very viable, have a really good chance. I'm going to give it to the experienced safety in Chris Smith. I think he did a really good job last year. I think he had 4 interceptions when the season was said and done. I think he was only behind Darion Kendrick when it came to picks. But I think him being a super senior, being a guy that's been around, I think he's going to make plays as far as getting a few picks. Kip, what do you think about these different categories? Who do you think are going to be the stat leaders when it's said and done for Georgia?
Man, great question. I think, rushing touchdowns, I want to say Kendall Milton just because I think that, his style might be more conducive to, getting more carries in the red zone. But I have to see it from him. I have to see him, one, stay healthy and two, miss tackles. I think the thought of Kendall Milton so far has been, a little bit greater than what we've been able to see on the field. The talent is there. He's got a chance to, be a Najee Harris type back, just a bigger back that's able to do a little bit of everything. But, when these two guys get on the field, Kenny McIntosh has been the guy who's produced. So we talk about Kenny McIntosh as maybe being like, that James Cook or his ability as a receiver. But I think his ability to make players miss in the open field gives him a chance to break off some big runs and potentially have some long rushing touchdowns. So, I like Kenny McIntosh as well in that area. You go into sacks, that one's tough because you mentioned Nolan Smith. He hasn't been able to really put up big sack numbers so far, but as far as pressure in the quarterback, he's a guy that has a lot of ability there. I think he was 3rd or 4th in that last year. Hasn't been able to finish in that aspect. So I do think he has a chance to be the guy for Georgia in that area. But I think Jalen Carter can be the guy that lead them in sacks. He's a guy that, kind of played behind the big three the last couple of years with Trevon Walker. You had Devontae Wyatt, obviously Jordan Davis. Those guys were had big roles. But, I mean, Jalen Carter's the most disruptive player on Georgia's defense. And if he's going to be the leader of this defense this season, I think getting to the quarterback is going to be important. Everyone, you look at the outside linebacker position at Georgia as being the one that's kind of featured as far as maybe havoc plays. But, I mean, Jalen Carter had 8.5 tackles for loss last year. He has the opportunity to get back there and wreak havoc. And I think so if you're looking for tackles for loss, you're looking for sacks, I think Jalen Carter leads Georgia in both and has an All-American season, kind of as that standout on defense to really rack up the stats, regardless of the fact that he's going to see double and triple teams. I think he's just too talented and too disruptive for opposing offensive linemen to really, get their hands on him. As far as interceptions, I kind of look at it usually in Georgia's offense. You have your safeties; they're able to kind of play a little bit of center field out there. But I think Keely Ringo is going to have a lot of eyes on him. Opposing offensive coordinators are probably going to try to avoid him. So I think Kamari Lassiter is that guy. I think he's the guy that had 4 or 5 interceptions this year. If he's able to hold off all of these talented freshmen and keep the starting cornerback position, which I think he's capable of doing this season, then I think he can be a guy that can be highly productive for Georgia. And I think he's going to have a lot of passes thrown his way. It's going to be up to him if he can make plays in the ball and read the quarterback well enough to time those plays in the ball. But I really liked what I saw from him, and the fact that he played as much as he did last year as a freshman with all the other talented defensive backs on the roster just tells me that, Kirby Smart, Will Muschamp, they all see a lot in him. And I think they're going to ask a lot of him in year 2.
Shout out to Jordan Harris, who made sure and pointed out he got back on here. He mentioned his streak being on the live podcast. I liked his options for that question. Interceptions, Ringo. Sacks, a guy that I was going to bring up, Robert Bill, who led, we didn't pick the guy that led the team in sacks last year, which seems like a fair enough decision by Jordan. And then he agreed with us with Kenny McIntosh. I think it's going to be really interesting. And I thought you made a really good point, Kip, with picking Lassiter because, now Keely Ringo is that known commodity. People know now they can't really afford to test him because more often than not, it's not going to go their way. I mean, looking at the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback throwing a pick 6 to Keely in that championship game, you got to think some of these offensive coordinators are going to, really be concerned about challenging a guy like that, a guy that, as we keep seeing, a lot of people think has a really, really good chance to be a top draft pick when we get to 2023.
Yeah, I just think that there are a lot of these guys are going to have, game plans built around them. And I think the one guy that I think is able to beat that, I just go back to Jalen Carter. I know Beal, again, productive when he was on the field. You didn't have Adam Anderson out there. Like I said, Jermaine Johnson, obviously at Florida State had a big year. Bill stepped up when they needed him to in a lot of those games. But I'm not sure how many snaps, really his position, which is a little bit different. You have the jack position, but I think Nolan Smith is going to play a lot more snaps than Robert Bill will this year. And I think that if out of those two people, I think Nolan Smith's going to have more opportunities. It's really just about him finishing. I mean, that's the one aspect of his game that he hasn't really been able to put together. And so, I do think that in the end, Nolan has more sacks this year than Robert Bill, but I just like Jalen Carter. I just think he's a guy that he's used to being double and triple teamed when he's on the field, even when you have those other defensive linemen. And I think he's just going to be highly productive this year and potentially give Georgia another top 10 overall pick in next year's draft.
Jay Evans in the comments mentioned, I think Nyland Green will bring some noise. Liked what I saw from Nyland during spring practice. It'll be very interesting to see what kind of role he carves out on this defense. Let's get through a couple more questions before we wrap up this episode. Really liked this one from the Austin Dawg, kind of sticking with the numbers. It said, hey, Jordan, would love your prediction for this upcoming season. Top 3 in order among receivers and tight ends for most yards and most touchdowns. He said, assuming Bowers is an obvious choice, then the next 3 after Brock. Yeah, I mean, I think after the season Brock Bowers had, I'd be crazy not to say that he'll be the top receiver again. And I think Georgia's in a position where they're not going to need him to be the be-all, end-all, even at his own position. So looking at most yards, I gave the edge to Brock Bowers. I said Adonai Mitchell will be second. I think AD is poised to really be that number 1 receiver. And we heard it throughout spring, and I thought he backed it up. I think he'll be that guy. And then as far as receiving yards, I went with Ladd McConkey. I still think that he's going to play a very important role on this passing attack and have a big role and make a lot of plays. I think that lad's going to find a way to still be involved and still help and contribute in a big way. Going with the most touchdowns, gave the edge to Brock again. Again, I'm not crazy. I'm gonna need to see it to believe it. If someone other than Brock Bowers is gonna have the most receiving touchdowns, A.D. Mitchell is who I had second, and then Arik Gilbert was who I think is gonna be the third guy. I think that he's gonna play a big role in this passing game, and I think he'll have his share of yards. He was kind of the third guy I looked at between him and Ladd and a couple of the other options, Karras Jackson as well. But I think that he's really going to be a guy that when they're in the red zone, they look to get the ball. I mean, you saw even, I know it was just a scrimmage, but at G-Day, he had really two impressive touchdown grabs, had another big grab on the very last drive that basically helped Georgia get in field goal range to win the game. I think that, he's going to have a big role, and I think he's going to make some big plays in the passing game. Kip, where do you kind of sit with these two questions as far as who's going to have the most receiving yards and who's going to have the most touchdowns when it's said and done?
Well, I like 5 of your picks. I say that I think I like your top 3 for touchdowns. I like your top 2 for yards. I have a different pick. For number 3, and I think this is a guy that maybe isn't being talked about a lot just because he hasn't been on the field a while. But I think he's going to come out in a big way, and I think it's Dominic Blaylock. I think he's going to be ready for fall camp, and I think he's going to be that guy. You look at Jermaine Burton going to Alabama, an all-around, arguably Georgia's most talented receiver on the roster last season. They need more help, outside of at that Z receiver position, and I just think that Dominic Blaylock can play slot, but you have Karras Jackson, you have Arian Smith, but Dominic Blaylock could also play outside. I think he's that talented. I think he's a guy that's going to get an opportunity to catch a lot of passes. And I mean, you saw what he did as a freshman. He is as reliable as you can get as a pass catcher, but he also, was really able to make defenders miss as well. And so I just think that he's a guy that's going to get a lot of touches as long as he's able to come into fall camp, show he's back to where he was before. I think he's going to be one of Georgia's top 3 receivers this year, and I think he's ready to do that. I think that from all I've heard that this offseason that he's got being able to get back to where he was and being able to participate. I think he's ready to get out there and get back on the field because just him on the sideline just watching last year, he's itching to get out there. He's just a competitor. He's always had that in him, and I think he's going to showcase that he was a very talented freshman, and he is still one of the most talented wide receivers on Georgia's roster this year.
Let's tackle one more question before we get out of here. This one from Hunker Down. Name a player or players who would have been a household name if they were not buried in the depth chart last year. Bottom line, who benefits the most from all the drafted players leaving? And then also an add-on to that was, what are we cooking this weekend since we're getting ready for 4th of July? I had 2 answers as far as the first question, as far as who is really going to benefit. And one of the guys is one that I feel like I wish I had $1 every time we've mentioned his name, Jamon Dumas-Johnson. You just think about the depth they had at inside linebacker. Just look at those guys that got drafted. I mean, seeing guys like Quay Walker and Nakobe, Channing Tindall, those guys all have big opportunities and made a lot of plays. But I think that Jamon is the real deal. I think he's a guy that, we continue to see that Glenn Schumann gets the most out of these inside linebackers. Even looking at some of the guys they've got committed in the 2023 class, he knows what he's looking for. He knows what he's wanting and what is needed to come to Georgia and really excel at inside linebacker. I think Jamon's got a really good chance to do that this season and really turn a lot of heads. The other person that I think will really benefit is Zion Logue, a guy that, even going back to the very first day of spring, Kirby was asked about him, and, Kirby didn't mince his words. He said that, there's a lot of, not necessarily pressure, but I mean, he's going to have to step up with losing guys like Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt. I think Zion's got a really good chance to make plays. I think, probably playing mostly that zero technique beside Jalen Carter. I think he's going to have real opportunities. I think he's a guy that has bided his time. A guy that when we talked to him during spring, he talked about, getting a lot more mature, growing in the time he's been at Georgia. That's something Kirby even talked about, that, basically he was a little immature when he first got to Georgia, which isn't anything new. I mean, when you got guys that come to this level, they have to learn right away, what it takes and what the expectations are. I think Zion's been a guy that has understood that and has grown from that, and I think he's got a chance to be really special this season.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, those are great picks. They actually were the guys that I would have mentioned if I had gotten the opportunity to speak first. But you get that benefit as the host, Jordan. So, for me, you start looking at the depth chart, and obviously you have to look at this guys that went to the draft last year and guys who have the opportunity to step up and replace him. And yeah, Jamon Dumas Johnson got some opportunities last year, and he made the most of them. You kind of just have to look and see what other linebacker, at that money and Mac position, which one of these guys, has a chance to step up and replace the most talented trio of inside backers we've kind of seen at Georgia. I like Tresman Marshall. If he can stay healthy, his athleticism, is really up there. It's right there with the guys that I just, we talked about with Quay Walker, Kobe Dean, obviously Channing Tindall. He's got that kind of capability as far as his athleticism. He's one of the fastest guys. I mean, they have those GPS trackers on him. He's always up there in the linebacker group, but he just has to stay healthy. He's had major injuries the last couple of seasons. He had a shoulder injury in 2020. I know he had the knee injury last year, but during preseason camp, he's the guy that I hear about a lot from the coaches at Georgia that really impress them. If he can come into camp and stay healthy, I think he can have a breakout season and kind of be that next guy at, LBU for Georgia. And you mentioned Jamon Dumas Johnson, obviously, but if there's any program that can have more than one guy that has a breakout season at inside linebacker, it's definitely Georgia.
Yeah, Jordan Harris agrees. He says, my guy Kip, and he says he will show out this season. Watch, talking about Tresman Marshall. Also, the question about what we're going to have this weekend, I think we're going to keep it simple over at the Hill household. I think we're probably doing burgers and hot dogs. Anything on the firing up the grill or anything like that for 4th of July weekend, Kip?
Well, assuming that the weather's good, it's kind of a small window. It's either going to, rain or just be really, really hot. It's tough to get the Kamado Joe out there for those low and slow cooks. I don't have it in me. I open that door and that he hits me in the face, but kind of man up and brave it out there. I might just fire up the Blackstone and just go the easy route, like you said, do some burgers. Maybe I throw some wings on there on the Kamado and try to get something done pretty quickly. I think that's going to be the key. So I don't think I'll be throwing up the Boston butt or anything else like that or ribs this year, but I'm looking forward to it, man. Just getting outside for a little bit, staying cool, being safe, and just enjoying the time with the family. This is, it's just a great weekend, and hopefully all you guys enjoy it as well.
Before we get out of here, I did want to throw in a little bit about Georgia men's basketball. Had a chance, and I'm sure a few of you guys have seen the story. If not, go check it out. Had a chance on Tuesday to sit down with Mike White, the new men's basketball coach. It was, really nice enough to invite me in. We did a one-on-one. I had a chance just to kind of pick his brain about what he's seen so far at Georgia, sort of the feel he's gotten. Really liked what he had to say. I thought that what he said and really his answers were really thought out. I thought that, he was very realistic in how he's approaching this rebuild. I don't think that was a word that Mike necessarily used. But the biggest question I had, I feel like he gave me a good answer on just asking him if the pieces were in place to win at Georgia and not to win in year one, but just eventually. Are the facilities, are the resources he has available enough to make Georgia a contender, which is obviously something they really have not been in the last 20 years, at least not consistently. And, I thought Mike gave me a really good answer. I mean, he said that, he thinks those pieces are in place. He said if he didn't think they were, he would not have taken the job. I was really intrigued by just what he had to say, what he had to share, sort of his vision for rebuilding this program. Obviously, this is a team that won 6 games last year. A lot of progress is needed, a lot of work to be done. But it seems like so far everything's going pretty smoothly as they make this rebuild. Someone did ask, I don't have the question pulled up, as far as what I think win-loss total will be in this first year. For me, my guess is going to be like 14. I think that would be a successful season. You go like 14-18. I still don't think this year one is going to be a team that really contends in the SEC. But you're coming off a season where, again, you won 6 games in total. You won one SEC game. I think that'd be huge strides. And, it's something, too, we saw earlier this week, which SEC opponents are going to get. Their conference schedule is pretty tough. I mean, the teams alone that they play just on the road, not some of the home and homes, are brutal. Arkansas, Alabama, Texas A&M, that's a few of those teams. It's not going to be easy in year one. And, I'm not convinced that he'll come in and immediately get them winning. But I think he's taken the right approach. And I'm really going to be interested to see how this all comes together as the season gets closer.
Yeah, I just think you could see the contrast between what we saw with Tom Crean, and he was a bit of a salesman. He's always tweeting, and then but all at the same time, the turnover that he saw, just how many players left, and then Mike White coming in and actually wanting a little bit of continuity and being able to keep his top player, from leaving through the portal, and then bringing some of these guys back, bringing your best players back. And it might be a little bit of a slow burn. That might be the expectation, but I just don't think the landscape allows that to an extent. So maybe year one, yeah. But I think Mike White knows that you have to kind of expedite things. Just the rebuild process has to happen pretty quickly. And so, yeah, you just got to take the right guys. And he knows that's the lesson he learned at Florida. Bringing the up-tempo style from Louisiana Tech, but then also having your best player be more of a methodical, plotting guard didn't work out well. And I think, you're able to learn lessons as a coach, and your trajectory is not just, one-sided. It's not, always going up, or, once you fail, you can't succeed again. So I think that's where Georgia fans have to kind of find that middle ground and know that maybe Mike White hit his ceiling at Florida, but also maybe he learned a lot at Florida and his ceiling isn't the same at Georgia. And while being Florida, as far as a basketball program, would be a huge success for Georgia, I don't think you should just look at this as just being the safe choice. I think that Georgia has an opportunity to have everything, that you can look for to be competitive consistently. And I think that is where Mike White will get Georgia. I think that is the upside in hiring a guy like him instead of, maybe taking a chance on a guy who hasn't proven himself. I think being a top half of the SEC basketball program, getting to the tournament on a regular basis is the goal for Mike White, is the achievable goal for him. And I think that would be a huge success for him as a hire if that's what Georgia is able to do.
Yeah, AD Josh Brooks made a big swing in getting a guy that knows the conference well. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to follow this team and especially just see how things go in year one as they try to build this thing into a contender. So we're going to get out of here on that. Thanks, everybody, for asking questions on the board. Thank you guys in the comments chiming in with thoughts and questions as well. Appreciate you guys supporting us. Make sure and pay attention to the site. There's going to be all kinds of stuff coming in the next few days. Obviously, stuff to watch. I'll shout out this afternoon. I'll have a feature on Christian Miller that I'm really excited about. Had a chance to talk to some of his coaches and got some really good insight on what Georgia's getting in him as a defensive lineman. So more good content coming along the way with that. But we'll get out of here on that note. Thanks again to Kip for coming on. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. Until next time, take care.